The free world knows my opinion of Vince Russo, and unless somebody asks me a question that I can tell an untold story or something that hadn't been gone over in some way that makes Russo look even more like a jackoff than he already is.
He's a fraud. Jim Cornette has spent decades calling out the people who hurt wrestling, and this list of 10 wrestlers reveals exactly who destroyed the business from the inside. Wrestling is at its best when it feels real, when the struggle matters, when fans believe what they see. That belief creates money, fills arenas, and builds legends. The Territory Days proved this formula worked. Promoters understood that fans paid to see fighters, not performance artists. The illusion of competition had to be protected at all costs, because once that illusion broke, the money dried up. But when wrestlers treat the ring like a joke, they kill that belief one match at a time. Cornette has identified the exact frauds who made wrestling a punchline instead of a sport. Some of them are veterans who should know better. Others are young stars who never learned the rules in the first place. And if you like wrestling truth bombs like this, hit the hype feature and give this video some hype so more fans see it. The fascinating part is how these frauds operate. They do not just wrestle badly, they actively damage the entire industry by teaching fans to stop caring. When a match looks choreographed, the audience stops investing. When a promo exposes backstage drama for a cheap pop, the illusion shatters. When a gimmick parodies wrestling itself, the legends who built this business get disrespected, and the damage compounds over time. Each fraud creates a new generation of wrestlers who copy the fraudulent style. Each exposed business moment teaches casual fans to laugh at wrestling instead of respecting it. Each meta joke reminds the audience that they are watching actors pretend to fight, not athletes competing to win. Cornette has watched this decay for years, and his list is not random anger. It is a surgical breakdown of who killed what and why it matters. Why? The names on this list range from writers who never understood the medium to veterans who betrayed their own legacy, from performers who spam moves until they mean nothing to characters who literally wrestle inanimate objects. The fraud designation is not about personal dislike. It is about identifying the specific mechanisms that devalue professional wrestling and drive away the mainstream audience. The most recent explosion happened when a veteran crossed the line in a way that shocked even long-time observers. Adam Copeland, known to millions as Edge, built a Hall of Fame career on professionalism, multiple world championships, main event matches at the biggest shows, decades of experience, a reputation as a class act who respected the business and protected its tradition. Then he signed with AEW, and something changed. During a live promo on television, Copeland delivered what appeared to be a scripted defense of AEW that felt like a direct response to real-life criticism from CM Punk. He stood in the ring and addressed the tribalism of wrestling fans, the online debates, the backstage drama that had become public knowledge. To Cornette, this was not just a bad promo or a misstep, it was a betrayal of everything a veteran should represent. The professionalism paradox is simple. When a respected name endorses a flawed product, casual fans assume the product must be good. They think if Edge says it is legitimate, it must be legitimate. But Copeland's promo exposed the business for a corporate pop. He went into business for himself instead of protecting the illusion that wrestling is about competition, not tribalism. Cornette labeled him an unprofessional fraud, and the sting was sharper because Copeland should have known better. Veterans are supposed to guard the gate, not open it wide for the carnies to walk through. A Hall of Famer using his credibility to validate what Cornette sees as fraudulent wrestling is, in his taxonomy, one of the worst betrayals possible. But Copeland is just the most recent example. The fraud epidemic goes deeper, and Cornette has built a comprehensive list of exactly who belongs on it and why. Let's count down the 10 wrestlers who were frauds, starting with the performers whose damage was specific and working toward the architects of total industry decay. Number 10, Joey Ryan. If professional wrestling is supposed to look like a fight, Joey Ryan did the complete opposite. His entire gimmick centered on his genitals. The signature move was called the dick flip. Opponents would grab his groin and he would flip them with the force of his pelvic thrust. To Cornette, this was a moral and professional fraud that mocked every wrestler who tried to make the business look legitimate. The designation of fraud comes from the mockery. Ryan was not wrestling. He was performing a parody designed to get a laugh at the expense of everyone else in the industry. Think about what the dick flip says. It says that wrestling is not about skill or strength. It says that a man's groin is more powerful than years of training. If a wrestler can be defeated by another man's groin, then the entire concept of competition collapses. The audience is told explicitly that wrestling is fake, and they were idiots for believing otherwise. Cornette's critique is about hiding incompetence behind a gimmick. Ryan used a cheap, vulgar concept to cover up a lack of actual athletic ability and psychological understanding. He did not need to learn how to tell a story in the ring because the gimmick did the work. But gimmicks like that train audiences to stop taking wrestling seriously. They teach fans that wrestling is a joke, not a sport. They spit on the graves of legends who worked for decades to make wrestling look legitimate. And when wrestling becomes a punchline, the money disappears. Casual fans do not pay to see a joke. Ryan represents the absurd extreme of fraudulence, where the performance actively destroys the credibility of the media. Every time he did that move, he damaged wrestling's reputation. Cornette sees that damage as unforgivable. Number 9. Orange Cassidy. Cornette calls him Pockets, and the nickname is a dismissal. Orange Cassidy's gimmick is built on indifference. He wrestles with his hands in his pockets. He performs kicks in slow motion. He shows no effort, no intensity, no desire to win. The character is a fundamental rejection of the fighting spirit that defines professional wrestling. To Cornette, this is fraud for a specific reason. Think about the logic. If a serious wrestler struggles to beat a man who is not even trying, what does that say about the serious wrestler? It says he is weak and incompetent. The entire roster gets devalued. The audience is told that the competition is a sham, that effort does not matter, that outcomes are predetermined and logic is optional. The specific mechanism of fraudulence is the devaluation of the opponent. Wrestling works when both competitors look strong. The hero overcomes a legitimate threat. The villain destroys a credible challenger. But when one wrestler is playing a character who does not want to wrestle, the whole system breaks down. The opponent looks like a fool. The match looks like a waste of time. Cassidy is a fraud because he is playing a wrestler who does not want to wrestle. And that concept is insulting. It is disrespectful to every wrestler who ever gave everything in the ring to make people believe. Cornette sees it as a gimmick that exists purely for internet fans who think wrestling being a joke is funny. But to mainstream audiences, to casual fans who might watch once and decide whether to come back, it is a signal that wrestling is not worth their time. And when those casual fans leave, they do not come back. Number 8. Eric Bischoff. The Monday Night Wars made Eric Bischoff famous. As the head of WCW, he went head-to-head with WWE and won in the ratings for 83 consecutive weeks. But Cornette argues that success was a fluke built on stolen ideas and unlimited budgets. The fraud designation focuses on two areas. First, corporate mismanagement during his time in power. Bischoff had access to Ted Turner's money, and he spent it without restraint. He overpaid aging stars, bringing in Hulk Hogan and Randy Savage at astronomical salaries. He neglected the development of new talent. He created a fraudulent peak that could not sustain itself. When WCW collapsed, it collapsed because there was no foundation. The territory system was designed to generate profit through consistent booking over decades. Bischoff's crash TV model burned bright and burned out. Second, historical revisionism in the modern podcast era. Bischoff spends his time on podcasts, and Cornette accuses him of lying and twisting numbers. Bischoff implies that modern promotions like AEW are failing while ignoring the structural failures of his own leadership. Cornette sees Bischoff as a corporate shill who prioritizes his relationship with power over honest assessment. The fraud is the gap between reputation and reality. Bischoff gets credit for the Monday Night Wars, but Cornette argues he was just a guy with a checkbook who copied WWE's playbook and got lucky for a while. Number 7. Maxwell Jacob Friedman. MJF is one of the most fascinating cases on this list because the fraud designation was not always there. Early in his AEW career, Cornette actually praised MJF. He looked like the future of the business. He stayed in character at all times. He cut promos like a classic heel, channeling the energy of Roddy Piper and Ric Flair. He had charisma, edge, and the ability to make people hate him in the best possible way. He looked like a guy who could main event WrestleMania someday. But as time went on, Cornette's assessment shifted. The fraud designation came from what Cornette calls the cosplay dilemma. Instead of being a natural villain, MJF started to feel like someone pretending to be a supervillain wrestler. The performance became forced. The promos became edgy for the sake of being edgy. He was doing an impression of a heel rather than being a heel. And that distinction matters. A professional wrestler should be an exaggerated version of themselves. Ric Flair was Ric Flair turned up to 11. Roddy Piper was Roddy Piper with the intensity dial maxed out. But MJF started to feel like an actor playing the role of a wrestler playing a villain. That extra layer of separation creates a fraudulent performance. The audience can feel that it is not authentic. The critique centers on the shift from pro to edgy try-hard. The early MJF promos had real heat. He insulted the crowd in ways that felt personal. He targeted their insecurities. He made them want to see him lose. But as time went on, the insults became cheaper. The promos became more meta. He started referencing wrestling terminology and inside baseball in ways that broke the fourth wall. Instead of being a villain inside the wrestling world, he became a villain commenting on the wrestling world. And that shift killed the believability. Cornette's second-order insight is that environment mattered. In a structured company like WWE, MJF might have been reined in by experienced producers and bookers. They would have polished his rough edges and kept him focused. But in AEW, without a strong authority figure with territory era experience, he indulged in his worst impulses. He became a big fish in a small pond who lost the drive to be truly great. The fraudulent shift is visible in specific moments. His promos used to build to something. Now they meander and rely on cheap heat. His character used to have consistent motivation. Now he breaks character to cry at press conferences or to make meta jokes about the wrestling business. And every time he breaks that fourth wall, he exposes the business a little bit more. MJF had the tools to be legitimate, but the environment turned him into a fraud. And that makes the loss even more tragic because you can see what he could have been. Number 6, Adam Copeland. We opened with Copeland because his fraud status is the most recent and most shocking to longtime observers. But his placement at number 6 reflects the specific nature of his transgression compared to the others on this list. Unlike Joey Ryan or Orange Cassidy, Copeland is not a stylistic fraud. He can work, he can tell a story, he can make people believe in the struggle. His matches have always looked believable. His promos have always had weight. He knows how to structure a feud and how to build to a payoff. The fraud designation is not about his in-ring ability. It is about the professionalism paradox. As a multi-time world champion and industry veteran with decades of experience, Copeland was expected to represent the old guard values. Veterans are supposed to stay above the petty feuds and the tribalism of the internet wrestling community. They are supposed to protect the business, not expose it. They are supposed to guard the traditions, not tear them down for a cheap pop. But Copeland's promo in AEW violated all of that. By delivering what appeared to be a scripted defense of AEW that felt like a response to CM Punk's real-life criticisms, Copeland went into business for himself. He took a backstage conflict, something that should have been handled behind closed doors, and brought it out in front of the cameras. He exposed the drama for a corporate pop, giving AEW fans a moment to cheer while telling the broader wrestling audience that the drama is more important than the wrestling. And that is the fraud. When a veteran uses his credibility to validate a product that Cornette sees as fundamentally flawed, it is a betrayal. Casual fans see Edge endorsing AEW and think it must be good. They do not know about the backstage politics or the creative failures. They just see a Hall of Famer saying this is legitimate wrestling. And that endorsement shields the frauds from criticism. It gives cover to the Young Bucks and Kenny Omega and everyone else on this list. The betrayal stings because Copeland should have known better. He came up in an era where protecting the business was the most important rule. He worked with veterans who taught him to guard kayfabe and respect the traditions. And then he threw all of that away to defend a promotion that pays him. The fraud is not what he does in the ring. It is what he did on the microphone. A veteran who uses his credibility to validate fraudulent wrestling is, in Cornette's view, the biggest fraud of all. Number 5, Hangman Adam Page. The case of Hangman Adam Page is a transition point on this list. The frauds we have covered so far have been mostly about style or specific incidents. But with Page, we get into something deeper: professional misconduct, a breakdown in the locker room culture, a violation of the trust that makes wrestling possible. Page became a primary target of Cornette's anger after his real-life conflict with CM Punk, and Cornette views that conflict as a symptom of a larger problem in modern wrestling. The fraud designation is rooted in two things. First, the business for himself incident. During a live television promo, Page reportedly made unscripted remarks that alluded to backstage tensions with Punk. He took a personal issue and brought it out in front of the cameras without permission, without coordination, without any regard for how it would affect the promotion or his fellow wrestlers. In wrestling, this is called going into business for yourself, and it is one of the worst things you can do. Wrestling requires trust. Performers literally put their lives in each other's hands every time they step in the ring. You trust that your opponent will not hurt you. You trust that they will protect you. You trust that they are working together to tell a story, not settling personal scores. When someone violates that trust by making unscripted comments that expose backstage issues, they break the whole system. This act is fraudulent because it prioritizes the individual's ego over the collective success of the promotion. Page wanted to take a shot at Punk, so he did it on live television. He did not care about the consequences. He did not care that CM Punk was the company's biggest star. The guy drawing the most attention and potentially the most money. He did not care that alienating Punk would damage AEW's credibility and long-term prospects. He cared about his own feelings in that moment. And Cornette calls that empty-headed decision-making. Page chose petty revenge over protecting the business, and the consequences were real. Punk eventually left AEW after a physical altercation backstage. The company lost its biggest star, and Cornette blames Page for starting the chain of events that led to that outcome. Second, the aesthetic inconsistency of the millennial cowboy. Beyond the locker room issues, Cornette critiques Page's character as an inauthentic fraud. Page portrays a rugged cowboy, a traditionalist tough guy, but his behavior and presentation contradict that image constantly. A famous example is Page arriving at a match in an electric Rivian truck with steer horns mounted on the hood. Cornette finds this absurd. A real cowboy would not drive an electric vehicle. The character logic collapses. Compare Page to Stan Hansen, an authentic cowboy character from the Territory days. Hansen was rugged, gritty, a believable tough guy who lived the gimmick both in and out of the ring. Hansen looked like he could beat you up in a bar fight. Hansen protected the business and the top stars because he understood his role. Page, on the other hand, wears butterfly jeans and Dolly Parton shirts. Page publicly attacked the top draw on television. Page has storylines about anxiety and electric vehicle. The fraud is the cosplay approach to a classic character. Page is pretending to be a cowboy instead of being one. And in wrestling, pretending is the same as lying. The combination of professional misconduct and aesthetic fraudulence puts Page at number 5. He damaged the business through his actions and through his presentation, and both types of damage are unforgivable in Cornette's eyes. Number 4, Kenny Omega. Kenny Omega is frequently grouped with the Young Bucks in Cornette's critiques, but Omega's fraud status has a specific dimension that elevates him higher on this list. Cornette often uses the phrase fetish object when describing Omega's style, and what he means is that Omega's wrestling is designed for a very specific, almost obsessive subset of fans, rather than a broad mainstream audience. The wrestling is built to appeal to hardcore internet fans who value choreography and athleticism over psychology and storytelling. And that niche appeal is part of the fraud. The most cited piece of evidence in the Omega fraud case is the blow-up doll match from 2011. Omega wrestled an inflatable doll in Japan. To a traditionalist like Cornette, this is not a creative exercise or an avant-garde performance. It is an act of professional sabotage. Think about what that match says. If a wrestler can have a competitive match with an inanimate object, something that cannot fight back, cannot sell, cannot resist, then what does that say about every match against a real opponent? It says the opponent does not matter. It says the struggle is fake. It says the wrestler is essentially wrestling himself while the opponent is just there to facilitate the choreography. Every wrestler who has ever struggled in a match against a real human being is made to look like a fool. Because if Omega can have a competitive match with a doll, then why would he ever struggle against an actual trained athlete? The blow-up doll match exposes the business in the worst possible way. It tells the audience that the physical skill of the opponent is irrelevant because wrestling is just a performance. It is a dance. It is choreography. And once the audience understands that, they stop caring about the struggle. They stop believing in the competition. They stop investing emotionally in the outcomes. And when that happens, wrestling stops being wrestling and becomes something else entirely. Beyond the blow-up doll incident, Cornette critiques Omega's cosplay aesthetic. Omega adopts the movements, facial expressions, and vocal patterns of an anime villain. He does not wrestle like a fighter. He wrestles like a character from a cartoon. And that creates a layer of separation between the performance and reality. A professional wrestler should be an exaggerated version of a real person. Someone you could imagine meeting in real life, just turned up to maximum intensity. But a cosplay wrestler is a person playing a fictional character who happens to be a wrestler. And that extra layer kills the authenticity. Mainstream audiences, the people wrestling, needs to grow and sustain itself. Have no connection to anime references or video game aesthetics. They want to see athletes who look like they could hurt someone. They want to see competition that feels real. Omega's style is built for a niche audience, and that niche will never be big enough to support a major wrestling promotion. The fraud is the fetish object problem. Omega has the talent and the ability to be a mainstream star, but he chooses to wrestle for a tiny subset of hardcore fans who enjoy meta commentary and inside jokes. And in doing so, he caps the growth of any promotion he works for. The general public has no interest in a product that constantly reminds them it is not real. And Omega's entire style is built on that reminder. Number 3, the Young Bucks. Bucks. Matt and Nick Jackson, collectively known as the Young Bucks, represent the most significant ideological battle in contemporary wrestling. To Jim Cornette, the Bucks are the primary architects of a style that has fundamentally damaged the industry. They prioritize spots, pre-planned athletic sequences, overstory, the psychological progression of a match. And that prioritization is not just a stylistic choice. It is a fraud against everything wrestling is supposed to be. The genesis of the conflict goes back to Ring of Honor, where Cornette served as head of creative and the Bucks were on the roster. Cornette's critique was specific and technical. The Bucks used high-impact maneuvers, especially the super kick, dozens of times per match. In traditional wrestling logic, a super kick is a finishing move. One good kick to the head ends the match. It is devastating. It is the ultimate weapon. But in the Young Bucks style, the super kick is a transitional move. They kick opponents in the face 5 times, 10 times, 15 times per match, and the opponents just keep getting up and doing flips. The fraud lies in the destruction of internal logic. If you can kick someone in the face 10 times and they immediately stand up to do a backflip, then the kick does not hurt. And if the kick does not hurt, then the struggle is not real. The audience is implicitly told that wrestling is choreography, not competition. The wrestlers are performance artists, not fighters. And once that truth is revealed, the illusion is gone forever. The Young Bucks were told this repeatedly. Cornette explained it. Other veterans explained it. But the Bucks refused to adjust. Instead, they doubled down. They started selling merchandise with the phrase "killing the business," turning their critics into a marketing opportunity. They chose personal branding over industry integrity. They chose being cool on the internet over being respected by the mainstream. And that choice is what makes them frauds. They know better. They have been told the damage they are causing. They do not care. Cornette's economic insight cuts even deeper. He argues that by catering exclusively to a niche audience of internet fans who enjoy meta-commentary and self-referential humor, the Bucks have effectively capped the growth of any promotion they lead. AEW is the perfect case study. The promotion has a loyal, hardcore fan base that loves the Young Bucks style, but it cannot grow beyond that fan base. Casual fans, mainstream audiences, regular people who might watch wrestling if it looked believable, have no interest in a product that constantly reminds them it is fake. The Bucks devalue individual maneuvers by spamming them until they are meaningless. They erode mainstream suspension of disbelief with meta commentary and inside jokes. They eliminate emotional stakes by refusing to sell, keeping the pace of the match constant instead of building valleys and peaks. They desensitize audiences to physical feats by providing non-stop high-intensity action. When everything is a high spot, nothing is a high spot. When every move is spectacular, no move is special. The fraud designation is complete because the Young Bucks represent a conscious choice to prioritize a niche audience over mainstream appeal. They are not just bad at wrestling. They are actively hostile to the principles that made wrestling a major industry. And they have built their brand on that hostility. They wear the criticism as a badge of honor. And in doing so, they have influenced an entire generation of wrestlers to copy their style. Young wrestlers see the Bucks getting paid and getting cheered by hardcore fans, and they think that is the path to success. So they spam super kicks, they do flips, they perform spots, and they never learn how to tell a story or build psychology or make the audience believe. The damage compounds with every new wrestler who follows the Young Bucks blueprint. Number 2, Shawn Michaels and the Clique. Shawn Michaels is universally recognized as one of the greatest in-ring performers in wrestling history. His matches are legendary. His athleticism is undeniable. His ability to tell a story in the ring is nearly unmatched. But Jim Cornette holds a deep, lasting anger toward him. And the fraud designation has nothing to do with in-ring ability. It is about professional responsibility and the destruction of kayfabe. The specific incident that defines the fraud is the curtain call. In 1996, at Madison Square Garden, something happened that shocked the wrestling world. Shawn Michaels, Triple H, Scott Hall, and Kevin Nash, collectively known as the Clique, had a match. Some of them were faces, the good guys. Some of them were heels, the bad guys. They were supposed to be enemies. They had been selling rivalries for months. But at the end of the match, after the cameras had supposedly stopped rolling, they all embraced in the middle of the ring. Faces and heels, friends breaking character, hugging in front of a live audience. To Cornette, this was the ultimate betrayal. Professional wrestling works because of kayfabe, the maintenance of the illusion that the events in the ring are real. Wrestlers are supposed to stay in character at all times. Faces and heels are supposed to hate each other, not just in the ring, but everywhere. Because if the audience sees them being friends, the illusion shatters. And once the illusion is gone, the money disappears. People do not pay to see friends pretend to fight. They pay to see enemies actually fight. The curtain call told the audience explicitly that everything they had been watching was fake. The rivalries were fake. The emotion was fake. The wrestlers were just actors playing roles. And once that truth was revealed, it could never be taken back. The fraud is in the choice. The clique chose to prioritize their personal friendships and their desire to be cool over their professional obligation to protect the business. They chose to have a moment that felt good to them over the long-term financial health of the industry. They broke the most sacred rule in wrestling, and they did it in front of thousands of people at Madison Square Garden. Cornette views the curtain call as patient zero of modern wrestling's decline. Before that moment, most wrestlers understood that protecting kayfabe was the most important thing. After that moment, wrestlers felt entitled to break character whenever they wanted. The cool kids could break the rules. The fans in the audience did not matter. Being authentic to your real-life friendships mattered more than maintaining the illusion. And once that attitude took hold, the industry started its slow, inevitable decline. The mainstream audience started to leave. Casual fans stopped believing, and wrestling became a niche product for people who enjoyed the irony of knowing it was fake. Shawn Michaels and the Clique are number 2 on this list because they opened the door. Every fraud that came after them walked through the door they kicked open. The Young Bucks would not exist without the curtain call. Orange Cassidy would not exist without the curtain call. The entire modern style of meta commentary and self-referential humor exists because the Clique decided that being cool was more important than protecting the business. And that decision, that one moment, changed wrestling forever. Number 1, Vince Russo. The biggest fraud in professional wrestling history is not a performer, it is a writer. Vince Russo, the former head writer of WWE during the Attitude Era and later the head of creative for WCW, is viewed by Jim Cornette as the single individual most responsible for the modern decline of professional wrestling logic. The fraud is not about one incident or one stylistic choice. It is about a fundamental, catastrophic misunderstanding of what wrestling is and how it works. The core of the fraud lies in a single quote. Vince Russo once said, "We will just teach actors to wrestle, because if I can learn to work in the ring, anyone can." To Cornette, this statement reveals everything wrong with Russo's philosophy. It is a fraudulent premise that devalues the years of physical training and paying of dues required to become a credible professional wrestler. Wrestling is not just acting. It is a specific athletic skill set that takes years to develop. It is learning how to fall without getting hurt. It is learning how to make your offense look devastating while keeping your opponent safe. It is learning timing, psychology, crowd control, and ring awareness. Russo never understood any of that. He treated wrestlers as interchangeable actors in a soap opera, and by doing so, he stripped the industry of its dignity and replaced it with a disposable, low-quality entertainment model. The fraudulence of Russo's booking style is visible in his tenure at WCW. He relied on swerves, unexpected twists designed purely to surprise the audience. He booked matches with no finishes, where the match would end in a disqualification or a run-in or some other non-conclusion. He created storylines that made no sense, where characters would turn heel and face multiple times in a single month. The goal was shock value. Keep the audience guessing, keep them surprised. But the problem with that approach is that it destroys long-term faith in the product. When you book a match, you are making a promise to the audience. You are saying, "Watch this match, and there will be a satisfying conclusion." When you break that promise over and over, when matches end in non-finishes and storylines go nowhere, the audience learns that nothing matters. They learn that investing emotionally in characters is pointless because the story will change next week anyway. They learn that the rules are arbitrary and the outcomes are meaningless. And once the audience learns that lesson, they stop caring, they stop watching, they stop buying tickets. Russo's Crash TV style created short-term rating spikes. The shock value would draw people in for a week or two, but it burned through the audience's trust. And trust, once lost, is almost impossible to rebuild. Cornette views Russo as a con man who convinced executives he was a genius while actually destroying the industry from the inside. The Attitude Era was successful not because of Russo's writing, but because of Steve Austin and The Rock, two generational talents who would have been stars no matter who was writing for them. Russo took credit for their success, while his booking actively made the product worse. And then he went to WCW and applied the same formula, driving that promotion into the ground. The death of anticipation is the lasting legacy of Vince Russo. In traditional wrestling, a big match is built over weeks or months. The hero chases the villain. The tension escalates. Small victories and setbacks make the audience invest in the journey. And then the payoff, the big match, delivers on all of that built-up emotion. That is how you create memories. That is how you make fans care. But in Russo's Russo's world, there is no payoff. Every match ends in a swerve. Every storyline gets interrupted by a new swerve. The audience learns that patience is punished and investment is wasted. So they stop investing, they stop caring, and eventually they stop watching. The fraud extends beyond Russo's active time in wrestling. In the modern era, he continues to defend his approach. He claims that his ratings prove he was right. He argues that wrestling is just entertainment and logic does not matter. But Cornette's analysis cuts through that defense. Russo did not build anything. He burned through the audience that previous generations had spent decades building. He took the trust that fans had in wrestling, trust that had been carefully cultivated by promoters and wrestlers who protected kayfabe and respected the struggle, and he turned it into cynicism. He taught fans to expect disappointment. He taught them that wrestling is a joke, and once that lesson is learned, it cannot be unlearned. Vince Russo is number one on this list because he is the architect of narrative decay. Every fraud that came after him was following the blueprint he created. The Young Bucks spam super kicks because Russo taught the industry that moves do not need to mean anything. Orange Cassidy wrestles with his hands in his pockets because Russo taught that wrestling does not need to look real. MJF breaks the fourth wall because Russo taught that exposing the business is acceptable. The curtain call happened because Russo's philosophy that the audience does not care about kayfabe had started to infect the locker room culture. Russo did not just damage wrestling during his time in power. He changed the entire philosophy of how wrestling is produced. He created a generation of wrestlers and bookers who think shock value is more important than storytelling. He created an industry that chases viral moments instead of building long-term stars. And the consequences of that shift are visible in every empty seat, every cancelled show, every mainstream fan who used to watch wrestling and does not anymore. Vince Russo is the fraud who made all the other frauds possible, and that is why he is number one. The designation of individuals as frauds does not occur in a vacuum. It is supported and enabled by the institutional structures and production choices of modern wrestling promotions. Jim Cornette's critique extends beyond the performers themselves to the gatekeepers who allow these frauds to flourish. Kevin Dunn, a longtime executive at WWE, is frequently attacked by Cornette. The critique is about fraudulent production style. Dunn pioneered the use of rapid camera cuts and shaky cam in wrestling broadcasts. Dozens of cuts per minute, zooming in and out constantly, camera shake on every single punch. Cornette argues this is a deliberate fraud, designed to hide the fact that the wrestlers are not actually making real contact with each other. In traditional wrestling camera work, the camera is static and positioned to show the action clearly. The audience can see whether a punch lands solidly or misses by inches. But with Dunn's hyperactive style, the cuts are so fast and disorienting that you cannot tell what is actually happening. The camera actively compensates for the performer's inability to make the action look believable on its own merits. And that compensation is an implicit admission that the wrestling itself is not believable without technological trickery. Tony Khan, the owner of AEW, is viewed as the ultimate institutional enabler of fraudulence. Cornette's assessment is that Khan is a lifelong wrestling fan who is being taken for a ride by carnies and con artists. Khan loves wrestling deeply. He grew up watching it. He dreamed of being part of it. But he does not have the real-world experience or the hard-earned knowledge to separate genuinely good advice from self-serving manipulation. So, when the Young Bucks and Kenny Omega tell him their style represents the future of wrestling, he believes them wholeheartedly. When they ask for executive positions and real creative power, he gives it to them without hesitation. And suddenly, the inmates are running the asylum and there is no one to stop them. The lack of a strong booker or authority figure with actual territory era experience means that there is no effective check on objectively bad decisions. No one tells the Young Bucks to stop spamming superkicks until the move becomes meaningless. No one tells Orange Cassidy that his indifferent gimmick systematically devalues everyone on the entire roster. No one tells Hangman Page that going into business for himself on live television is completely unacceptable and grounds for immediate firing. The frauds are free to do whatever they want because the person in charge does not know enough to recognize the damage and stop it before it compounds. And the result is a wrestling promotion that caters exclusively to a tiny niche audience of hardcore internet fans while the mainstream completely ignores it. The research into Jim Cornette's identification of 10 frauds reveals a fundamental conflict at the heart of modern professional wrestling. It is a conflict between the athletic simulation, the belief that wrestling should look like a real fight, and the performance art. The belief that wrestling is a postmodern exhibition of choreography and irony designed designed for niche audiences. To Cornette, the 10 figures identified, from Vince Russo and Shawn Michaels to the Young Bucks and Orange Cassidy, represent the various ways in which performance art has cannibalized athletic simulation. Whether through a lack of physical realism, a failure of narrative logic, or a breakdown in professional conduct, these individuals are viewed as having exposed the industry to its own detriment. The designation of fraud is, ultimately, a call for a return to professional standards and traditional values that built the wrestling industry. Wrestling needs bookers who understand territory logic. Wrestling needs to fire the frauds and promote the professionals. Wrestling needs stories that make sense and build to satisfying payoffs. Wrestling needs to protect kayfabe and make the audience believe again. But here is the good news. Wrestling can still win back fans if it respects the struggle and the traditions. The tools are still there. The formula still works. The legends proved it for decades. The missing millions are out there waiting for a product that treats them with respect instead of contempt. Wrestling at its best is magic. It is athletes who make you believe in the impossible. It is stories that grab you and refuse to let go. It is moments that stay with you for the rest of your life. That magic still exists. It just needs to be protected from the frauds who would kill it for a cheap pop. When you tell the audience the business is a joke, eventually they stop paying to see the punchline. So hit that like button and subscribe if you want more wrestling truth. Drop a comment and tell us which fraud on this list is the most damaging to the business. Which one do you disagree with? Does Cornette have a point, or is he stuck in the past? Let us know what you think. The debate never ends, but one thing is certain. When wrestling respects itself, fans respect it back. And when wrestling treats itself like a joke, the fans stop laughing and start leaving.